Yeah, no worries. Okay, I'm gonna get it going right.
Yeah, Lily, can you hear me? Yeah, Lily?
She's on mute.
Well, I'm trying to unmute her, but she raised her hand, so I'm checking her audio.
Okay, we're live on Facebook, and I'm gonna switch host back over to Anna.
Perfect, thank you.
Anna, are we good to go?
Yes, the only person that I need to move to panelist real quick is Monsignor Sweatland. It'll just take me 2 seconds.
Okay.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Okay, looks like you're all in.
All right. Well, again, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again. This is the third meeting of the Task Force on Community Police Relations. This afternoon, we have a presentation, a discussion with the Baptist Ministers Union and the Concerned Black Clergy of Wyandotte County. And they have presented us over the last few weeks, about a month, some questions and some concerns that we've had some various communications back and forth, try to answer questions, but all these are great points for discussion. I just anticipate this will be an excellent conversation moving forward. What we'll do is we'll start. First of all, I'd like to introduce Commissioner Harold Johnson, who's co-chair, and I will pass this on to Commissioner Johnson, who will ask, obviously, for all the task force members to introduce themselves, and then after that we will move into just giving time to our guests to offer some opening remarks, and then we can move into the specific questions that they brought forward.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you all hear me very well?
Very well, thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Again, thank you for the opportunity to co-host this dialogue with our community, various aspects of our community. For such a time as now, I think that in spite of all the things that are going, we still need to foster a spirit of communication. And as this task force is aptly named as the Community and Police Task Force. And so I'm glad to have our guests on. I'll let you, Mayor, introduce those. I'll introduce or I'll go around and have our task force, Curtis Smart.
We lost you a little bit, Harold. It went garbled on us.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I was going to have Mr. Curtis Smart introduce himself.
Hello, I'm Curtis Smart, and I'm a member of this task force. I am also currently a recent graduate of the University of Kansas Medical Center with my master's in public health administration. And thanks to everyone that's here today.
Thank you. Reverend Tony Carter, and after him, we'll have Dr. Evelyn Hill.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Pastor Tony Carter. I pastor the Salem Baptist Church here in Kansas City, Kansas. I'm also the chairman of the Law Enforcement Advisory Board. Thank you.
Dr. Hill.
Hello and good afternoon. My name is Evelyn Hill, and I'm excited to be here on this evening. I am the Director of Equity and Justice at Avenue of Life right here in beautiful downtown Wyandotte County on 7th Street. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Monsignor Stuart Swetland. I'm the
Senior
president.
Stuart Swetland.
Yes. Hello, I'm Monsignor Stuart Swetland. I'm the president of Donnelly College, and at Donnelly College, I also am a professor of leadership and ethics.
Right. I know we have Miss Ureli Castor that was online. I think she's probably trying to get reconnected. Chief York and Major Soptic, could you just quickly introduce yourself?
Yes, good afternoon. Chief York, interim chief, have been so since February of last year.
Major Daniel Soptic, I'll be filling in for Sheriff Ash today.
And would you please introduce yourself?
Prior commitment. You ready?
Hi, sorry, I was having trouble with my audio. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, are we doing introductions?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, hi everyone. All right. My name is Ureli Castor. I just graduated from Donnelly College, and I will be continuing my education at Rockhurst in the fall. Thank you.
Back in your hands, Mayor. You're unmute yourself. You need to unmute yourself. There we go. Well,
No.
Welcome our guests from Concerned Black Clergy, Black Baptist Ministers Union. And I would ask Reverend Harris to please introduce himself, tell us your church, and then followed up with Reverend Banks.
Yes, pleased to be here tonight. I'm Reverend Seth Harris, pastor St. Andrew Missionary Baptist Church at 53rd and Parallel, and also the president of the Kansas City, Kansas Baptist Ministers Union.
Thank you. Reverend Banks. Oh, you need to unmute yourself, Reverend Banks.
Okay.
Reverend Jimmy Banks, pastor of the Strangers Rest Baptist Church and treasurer of the Baptist Ministers Union of Kansas City, Kansas.
Again, I would just ask as we begin, Reverend Harris, Reverend Banks, just some opening remarks, questions, concerns from you. Thank you.
Yeah, first of all, we want to thank everyone for coming in and sharing with us. And one of the most important things that I believe that needs to happen is that communication. I think communication is very important all the way around the whole city with everybody. I think we all need to communicate on everything that's going on. And I think that's very important. And that's one of the things we want to engage in is being in communication with the sheriff, the police, the mayor, everybody in the unified government and Wyandotte County so that we know what's going on. We can also share this information with the people of Wyandotte County.
Yeah, that's critically important, and not only communication, but there's a segment in our community feel like that we've communicated long enough, and we've talked about things and we've identified things, but we haven't made any actionable movement in a manner that has disquieted some of the long-standing discontent and the problems that continue to exist in our community. So in the opening statement, and I'm assuming everybody has a copy of what we submitted. Is that in my opening statement? I'm hoping that serious discussions can take place, and as a part of this group's activities, the task group, that you can come up with other task forces and groups that are empowered to put some programs and some activities together that get us moving towards areas of progress that are long needed. And so in order to expedite our use of time, you know, we can stipulate that we're at a problem situation. We can stipulate that there are feelings in the community about a lot of problems that have surfaced and gone unmet in the past, and with the recent activities of the George Floyd situation in Minneapolis, and the resulting furor internationally, talking about public safety in general, specifically about police actions. But I think in order for us to encompass the feeling of our community, public safety has to be included, because there have been continuing concerns and problems with the police department, with the fire department, and with the sheriff's department. So under the umbrella of public safety, we want to talk about some changes that need to be made in these particular areas. And it's imperative that we take this opportunity and this challenge very seriously, and get to work on doing what's necessary to make our community what it should be and what it could be if we only put our collective shoulders to the wheel. As Mayor Alvey has stated, we've been talking back and forth, and we've been communicating back and forth in written documents, and the last of which was a hand-delivered document to the mayor's office. And so we're continuing where we really left off in those discussions, and we're prepared to discuss the concerns, the issues, and any questions that you might have regarding what we have submitted. We want to be a part of a productive reform plan and process that gets us moving down the road to making some substantive change. Relative to previous submissions, we asked for a detailed breakdown of the dollar allocations to the police department, and the mayor indicated that that was going to take some work, and they would be diligently trying to provide that.
Reverend Banks?
Yes.
I think since you've listed these out, why don't we take some time on each one?
Yes.
So that so I have a question on number one. As previously stated, we want to be part of a productive, quote, reform plan and process, unquote, with actionable steps to be completed and implemented in a reasonable time frame. And so describe for us how you envision a reform plan and process. What are the elements that, what are the needs that are presented that you are seeking, that you think must be addressed? If you could be some specifics to that, so we can delve in.
What I envision is, as we talk through these particular issues, and assuming there's general agreement on the parties that something needs to be done, that task groups individuals, whatever, be appointed to go to work and to do some things that move us down the line of some progress. That's what I envision. I envision our input to you with these particular items might be included in the portfolio that comes out of all of the actions of the task force that get us work assignments, deliberations, items to be addressed, time schedules, resource needs, all those types of things that generally are included in a plan of action.
Thank you. But, and so what you're suggesting is that as we move through this list of items, these would be incorporated into the plan, the items to be addressed. That's
Sure.
right?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so I have a question on the, we did send back public safety funding allocations. What was lacking in the description of those allocations that you were looking for?
Well, what we were looking for is the allocation of those funds as they relate to specific functional responsibilities, and to get an idea of how those funds really address the problems that you identified. And if there's a deficiency there, that some attention be given to reassignment, possibly to a group, an organization with more clearly defined expertise and competence in those areas, and let the police be responsible for policing. Generally, what has happened over time, and this is relative to the police and the firemen, in our view, they have become aggressive in seeking to enlarge their membership. Generally speaking, that's the intent and purpose of all unions, is to enlarge their membership. They never want to talk downsizing. They want to have pay increases and things like that. So that's what we want to try to make sure that those funds are allocated in a manner which maximizes their original intent.
Okay. Thank you. Reverend Harris, did you have anything to add?
Well, yeah, because we're concerned about our safety, you know, what's going on in our community, a lot of things that's going on. We want to make sure that the dollars fit what we're saying. We're saying one thing. If we're saying that, then we want to make sure the dollars are fitting what we're saying and the action of those dollars are being properly presented. You know, oftentimes we hear about money, we hear that it's there and it's going to be spent, but you know, how is it being spent? What is it being spent for? When is it being spent? We need to know all of that information and the outcome of all of that.
Okay. Okay, so I think what I'll just, in general, Mr. Criswell, if you could follow up with Reverend Banks and Reverend Harris to show what we've got, because to help dig in to see exactly kind of what allocations they're looking for, because I think we provided some very general numbers, but I think sounds to me they're looking for something more. But I think in general what you're asking for is the money allocated achieving the goals for which it was allotted.
Designed for, right.
That's what
Yeah, and does it really relate to the mission and objective of the police department?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Gordon, does that make sense that you would follow up?
Yes, Mayor, it makes sense, and I'll follow up with Reverend Banks and Reverend Harris, because what I hear you guys saying is you want to drill to a level of specificity about the police department's budget. And so I guess I would start with just looking at, divisions within the police agency and having you guys say what in this area of the police department do you think we are using appropriately or not using appropriately the resources that the commission has approved? Is that
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's it.
Absolutely.
Because over time, in most organizations, when they're originally staffed, they're appropriately staffed. But over time, the staffing expertise retires, is transferred, is promoted, and you have people in place who are not really competent providers of what the original intent was for the organization and for their goals and objectives.
okay?
Okay.
I mean, I'll have sort of specific questions for you, but I get what you're looking for.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask Gordon.
Yes, sir.
The next question: at what stage does the selection process for the chief of police currently reside? What's the projected timetable for completion?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and Chief York may have to help me with this. I believe we are planning to re-engage the outside consultant to start looking at accepting applications and resumes for a new chief. The outside consultant will give the administrator a list of qualified applicants. He and his team will narrow that down, and we hope to, I believe, engage in the process of actually bringing in the top candidates in, is it the spring? Is it the fall, Chief? Because COVID has changed our time frame. I want to say early 21, because we wanted to resume what we had started before the pandemic hit, which was we were literally going out and having sit-down meetings, not only with our neighborhood groups and community groups, but also with command staff, line officers, staff in our dispatch unit, to gauge from all of those groups what sort of qualifications the administrator should be looking for as we go about selecting the next chief. So our hope is that we can restart that process and be ready to go the first of the year.
Mr. Criswell.
Yes, sir.
I want to ask a question on that. I received some information that said in that process that the community would be involved in terms of asking questions on what they're looking for, what they expect in a police chief. And if that's the case, how would that information get out? Who would be involved in that? Because whatever we do, I just believe that the community must be a part of it and they must be involved, and I think we need to hear their input.
So we did a couple of things pre-pandemic to try to get at your question. First of all, just as a practical matter, Reverend, I can't tell you how many community groups, either formally organized or informally organized, we have in this community. So we recognize that. We recognize that we would not be able to have a sit-down, face-to-face conversation with literally every community group in our community. So what we did was we tried to identify key community groups and stakeholders, but we also put together a piece on our website where residents could go to our UG website and put in information about what they were looking for, what their expectations were as we go about the business of trying to select the best qualified candidate to be the next police chief. But there is a narrative across the community that we somehow have got to have a conversation with every group, and that's just not a practical endeavor. We will never get there if we do that. So we tried to create some opportunities and vehicles for community members to, one, sit down face to face, and two, use our electronic website to send in to the administrator their thoughts of what the qualities and qualifications of our next police chief ought be.
Right, and I do agree with you. I mean, if you start dealing with every community group, we'll have a problem. But I do have a concern. We have some very interesting people in the Kansas City, Kansas Baptist Ministers Union in terms of persons like Dr. Ricky Turner, Dr. C.O. Backus, who I think would probably be very well able to deal with some things, because we can get them back to our people if they could just be a part of that that community discussion.
Well, I will tell you, the Black Baptist Union and ministers were on a short list to have a face-to-face sit-down before the pandemic hit.
Okay.
And so I don't believe that the administrator is going to move off of that, but the pandemic just changed the way we do everything.
So,
Well,
so
and
that is
also-
in the plan. That is in the plan to meet with the Kansas City, Kansas ministers. And I want to say, we mentioned the Kansas City, Kansas Baptist Ministers Union, but what we want to say is that the Kansas City, Kansas concerned clergy, because it's more than just the Kansas City, Kansas Baptist Ministers Union. It's pastors, all pastors in Wyandotte County.
I understand.
And
I will
in
say,
the past,
go ahead, Reverend
there are
Banks.
several of us who have been a part of the final selection group that have interviewed the candidates, the finalists, on several occasions. I know I've been at least on two, and Dr. Backus, and I think Reverend Dr. Turner has been included also. So,
yeah.
I want to say to that, one of the requests from County Administrator Bach was that we would perhaps use, and I've not brought this to the task force yet, but it's a good point now, that we would actually use one of our sessions to host a conversation asking the community, those who wanted to call in, just to weigh in to say, this is what we think we need in our next police chief. So that may be something, if we have time at the very end of the task force meetings, later on, after we move through restorative justice and personal experiences, we might be able to accommodate. I didn't make a commitment on that because, again, this is just kind of a journey. We're trying to figure out where we go, but this might be a very easy way for us to bring more input to the county administrator, and he did ask for that. So that's
correct, Mayor.
Possibility.
I will interject on that. What Reverend Harris has said is very true. We do want to involve the voices of the various clergy across the city. And so I think we've got to do a lot better job. I think, Mayor, we've got a good list that we've been developing for.
We lost you again, Harold. We developed a good list.
COVID meetings that maybe.
Oh, our Thursday calls.
Yeah, exactly. The Thursday calls that we might be able to use as a list to start from, and that way we can do a more inclusive discussion from the clergy across Wyandotte County.
And just to note, there is a very definite feeling that Wyandotte County needs to go outside of Wyandotte County to select the next police chief. Because we believe that the problems that we're facing now are problems mired in the traditional way of doing things, in the relationships that exist, and some of them are addressed in our questions here in the area of nepotism and things that go on over the years and that end up continuing what has been done in the past, rather than getting a progressive leader who can address some of the challenges of today that got us into the situation where we're in now. So that's just a note.
Thank you.
Are we ready to move on to the next one?
Yes. Harold, you want to take this over?
All right, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Okay. You're talking about the review of General Order number 102 of the use of force, which resulted in the following questions from the clergy caucus there. Who is the ultimate reviewer and decision maker on determining whether appropriate use of force was applied? There are several questions that come after that, and I don't know. Let's see here. I'll do two at a time. So the first one will be, who is the ultimate reviewer / decision maker on determining whether appropriate use of force was applied? And what is the number of use of force cases that have been the subjects of lawsuits over the last 10 years? I'll lean to both Chief and to Gordon to kind of lead us through that discussion.
So Commissioner Johnson, I can answer the first question, and ultimately the answer would be me. So how the process works when it comes to an officer using force would be, it starts at the very lowest levels of the supervisory structure. So when an officer tells his supervisor that he has used force, the supervisor responds to the scene, interviews the arrestee, interviews the officer, and interviews anybody who witnessed the use of force, would interview neighbors who witnessed the use of force, or interview passengers of the vehicle that witnessed the use of force. He would do his own investigation and then submit that information to his captain. His captain would then review that information, and he would forward that information to our use of force coordinator. Our use of force coordinator is a Major George Sims. He reviews what the sergeants and the captains did, and then he would make a decision as if it needed to go to a further review, which would be me. So that's how the process works when it comes to the question of who is ultimately responsible for looking at those use of forces. There's 3 or 4 steps there, but ultimately, if the use of force coordinator feels like the use of force was not appropriate, he submits that information to me.
Very good.
Quick
All right.
question.
Chief York, could you explain? So suppose that as it comes up through the investigation and ends up on your desk, that if the person who, the person on the receiving end of the force would say, this was still excessive, I have, arguments with what was found, what's the process, what's available to that person for remedy?
So if that arrestee or suspect feels like the officer used excessive force, the remedy would be for him to go to internal affairs and make a formal complaint. And it would be investigated by the internal affairs unit. And then all the facts would be gathered, and then it would be reviewed by a deputy chief and then by me for possible discipline.
Okay. Chief, what is the level of competence of all of those interviewers in the process? Until you get to the point where there's some legal person who sits down and reviews all of that to indemnify as best he or she can the police force against any liability that they incur.
Well, if there is a unlawful use of force, is that what you're asking me? Where it goes
if there is an alleged.
Well, it would be The alleged use of force would be, I would determine if that officer committed a policy violation by looking at the facts of the case.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, all along the line, you've got people documenting, giving evidentiary testimony. At some point, when it comes to the legal arena, how competent, I mean, how satisfied are you that the competence of all of those interviewers and the documentation is sufficient to sustain what we're trying to do, or to sustain the decision that's been made?
This is what I would say to that, Reverend Banks. When our sergeants go out there and our captains go out there to interview the arrestee, and the arrestee gives them information as to what happened, and they also interview the independent witnesses, because they're mandated to get out there and interview independent witnesses that saw the use of force, or other officers that saw the use of force. I'm very confident that the investigation was done properly. And if the officer if it appears that the officer used excessive force, the sergeant would document that, and it would be run up the chain of command to me. And an internal affairs investigation would take place. And that person who was the victim of the excessive force, he doesn't have to make a complaint. We make the complaint. The chief's office makes the complaint. So to make this simple, if the sergeant and the captain say that officer violated policy, that's excessive force, that gets forward to internal affairs and to my office, and that person will be interviewed by us. He doesn't have to come to make a complaint. We make the complaint against the officer.
Okay. The media reports are full of reports that come into question, that information is shared that is found in the final analysis to have been incorrect, or something that's happened in the process. And so when you say you're satisfied with all of those steps being made in a manner that indemnifies the unified government against any legal liability?
Yes, I am confident that we do a very good job in policing our officers when it comes to their uses of force.
Okay.
But be clear, Chief, if you were to find that there was no, the arrestee would still have legal recourse, correct? That doesn't take away their rights to bring their own, even though it's so they could still file a suit, correct?
Yes,
absolutely.
Yes.
They could. If I misunderstood that question, then that would be the answer to that.
And what we're saying is, when we finish with it, we don't care if they file a charge or not, because we're sure that we have done the right thing, and we won't get backdoored at the last minute in a trial with some information coming that hasn't been shared with us.
Oh, that's possible.
Well, okay.
Chief,
I'm sorry,
this is
I didn't
Wetland.
understand. I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't understand that last exchange. I'm not sure what to take from that. So Reverend Banks, if you could repeat.
I said, if we do a thorough enough job, we're sure that all our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed, and we make the final determination, we shouldn't have any doubts as to whether or not we can withstand any charges, and that we have protected the unified government against any liability that may exist.
To which the chief said yes.
And he said
Right.
yes. Okay. So then Would we ask the question, have there been any lawsuits filed and what's the result of those lawsuits? And I know the data will be collected, but that's one indication to determine how successful we are in handling and being assured of the process that we're using now, that it works in our favor.
If you can, and I guess that question, you know, the question is, what is the number of lawsuits or number of use of force cases that have been subject to lawsuits over the past 10 years?
Yes, yes.
Do you all collect that data, Chief?
No, I do not have that information on lawsuits. It would be the legal department that would have that information because they deal with obviously the lawsuits.
Yeah, so when, to Chief's point, when the investigations are done, the legal department will, as you all know, go into executive session to discuss what they call litigation. And it's there that the elected officials review and ask questions of our legal counsel as to what is our, I call it our level of risk or liability. And that's where the governing body decides we have minimal exposure, we have little exposure, we have a lot of exposure. So then the decision is, how do we minimize the exposure to the government? And that will be where the attorneys will recommend a course of action. So it's hard for me to answer that question about the number of cases that have been settled in 10 years, because under Kansas law, you don't get to go into executive session unless you have an absolute need to be there. So you may be able to get that information through CORA, the Kansas Open Records Act, but that would not be information that I have readily available to me because I don't attend all executive sessions when it comes to litigation. And if there are pending cases currently within that 10-year period, those would not be disclosed either because they're still being litigated. So that will take a little bit of work to call out that information specifically to the number of cases that we've I guess settled on in that 10-year period.
Before we move forward, I want to go to Monsignor Sweatland.
Yeah.
Monsignor.
It seems to me this is one of the areas where our previous testimony has to come to this discussion. So Chief York and Reverend Banks or Reverend Harris, the DA has suggested that we have an external process for these potential conflicts, either in his office or some might say another structure might be an ombudsman kind of structure. From what I understand, the chief is saying it's not necessary, but I don't want to put words in his mouth, so I'd like to hear what he thinks of that proposal. And I'd like to hear what Reverend Banks and Reverend Harris and the group they represent think of that proposal. Is that something we need?
Okay, so Monsignor, I would say this. I firmly believe that our internal affairs units, our internal affairs detectives do a very good job in investigating officers' misconduct. And you would get Mr. Dupree to say the same thing as well, because we've talked about it. We do a good job. I can give you numbers. We've fired, we fired officers, we discipline officers. We send cases over to the DA's office. They get charged criminally. So to that end, we are doing what we're supposed to be doing when it comes to policing ourselves. So with Mr. Dupree's new process, I don't know what that looks like because we haven't really sat down and talked about it. There's a lot of unknowns. The devil's in the details with that. So I don't know what he's proposing, what that's going to look like and how that's going to work. But I'll tell you this, and the rest of the group here, we have a policy in place that's in our contract that lays out the policies and the processes and the procedures behind the internal affairs process. So I have to follow that contract. Mr. Dupree does not have to follow that contract, but I do. So there's timelines and steps that I have to take to adhere to that union contract. So again, what that looks like for Mr. Dupree's community integrity unit, I don't know. I don't have the answer just yet to that.
Well, generally speaking, when I look at the contracts, the self-policing or the self-discipline actions that's involved here is not good from my standpoint, and generally from the public standpoint, because there's too much of an opportunity for interference, for relationships, for things like that to enter into the process. You may have some departmental differences, but the human relationships cross all those barriers. And in a situation like Kansas City, Kansas Police Department, things have developed over the years and they have gone unfettered. So since we're talking, and you mentioned the contract, there's a question there, and Mayor, I don't want to be jumping all over, but there's a question relative to the collective bargaining agreement and the collective bargaining process. To the extent that the concerns of the commission are included in the parameters that are being negotiated before anybody goes to the table. Who really represents the interests of the general public at the table and talks about those things that during the course of the previous contract tenure or issues that have come up recently, there needs to be a change? Who represents that side of the dialogue in a negotiations experience? And to what extent is the input of the commissioners and the supervisors and the managers who have to manage and ensure that the contract is being followed? Who does all that? I mean, what's the current process?
Yes, no, so just in general, the process is, as the elected body, it is our duty, our responsibility to give guidance to the county administration, county administrator, and those who he assigns to negotiate the contracts. And so you would find, for instance, we would want to perhaps give directions to minimum staffing. We would want to say that we would set terms for retirement, obviously healthcare, all the benefits, all the wages and salaries. And if there were to be changes to direction, that would have to go from the governing body to the county administrator and work through the contract that way. But that's just on contract. On specific policies, for instance, the next question is, what is the current position on chokeholds? That is under the purview, that is under the authority of the chief. And so the specific actions, how they actually police, that is under the direction of the chief of police. But any other way in which general policy in terms of how to go about the negotiations with the bargain unit would come from the governing body. Chief, am I getting that right?
You are correct, Mayor.
Well, what I asked was,
I'm sorry.
What I asked was, do you as a governing body sit down with the negotiating leadership, the people who are going to be at the table, and do they walk into there with a list of changes in the contract that the unified government would like to have? Do they solicit your input before they sit down at the table and the paper is white
Yes.
to sign the agreement? They do that.
Yes. Yes. Gordon, am I right about this? I mean, as we start the process, there's always on 3 discussions, that is 3 or 4 commissioners at once, with the county administrator saying, we're getting ready to engage in labor negotiations. This is what we're looking at. This is what we're going to look at for wages, for benefits, any changes in policies. That is always brought forward to the commissioners, and the commissioners can also then bring their own. But that's a little more difficult to achieve because it requires consensus. It can't be that as mayor, hey, I want this change, and 10 commissioners don't. I don't speak for the entire governing body. 3 commissioners do not speak for the entire governing body. So it's a interesting process, but it's not just about labor. It's about any project the unified government gets involved in, trying to get a sense of where the commission will be if we launch a project, where they'll be at the end. And that's a very difficult thing because commissioners change, ideas change, situations change. But yes, there is an opportunity and a time for the governing body to weigh in on specific policy recommendations.
We've,
Like management rights.
let me interject real quick, because we're down at item 7A, and I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I want to make sure we get addressed as many questions as possible. So Monsignor asked for both Reverend Banks and Reverend Harris. So Reverend Harris, if you have anything, then we'll go to Reverend Carter from there.
Yeah, I do have some concerns. I'm hearing different things about this police investigation. I just strongly believe that, I don't know about a person investigating themselves. I strongly believe that we need an outside investigation. There's so much going on. I mean, you have to be aware that there's a buddy system and a lot of things can come up. We want to make sure that everything is fair. And so when we talk about the district attorneys, communication and what we see and what we hear, we almost want to say that we definitely need an outside investigation here in Wyandotte County.
Okay. Received. Thank you for that, Reverend Harris. If you don't have anything else, we'll go to Reverend Carter.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. I was sitting here listening, and I'm trying to listen 10 times more than I speak, and that's hard for me, but that's okay. The police chief and the sheriff are here, and one of the things that I have to ask, and I don't know necessarily we'll get an answer. I'm not necessarily looking for an answer. Yes, I am. Do you know of any instances in the last 10, 15 years where a wrong has been done by a policeman, use of force or anything that police officers should not be involved in, but they were never brought to trial? It was never mentioned. In other words, you just got swept under the carpet. Are either of you aware of any instances such as that? Because I think that's really what we're talking about.
Amen.
If
right.
use of force happens, and for whatever reason, Reverend Banks said relationships, it could be any number of things, making the department look bad. You may be doing it for a good reason, but for some reason, even in the litigation with the county attorneys and so forth, maybe they decided that this is going to be, the best way to handle this might be to just leave it alone, just not talk about it and let it go away. Are you aware, Chief or Sheriff, Brother Soptic, of any instances where that happened?
No.
And I'll listen.
Reverend Carter, I don't have any specific examples off the top of my head. I can tell you, if we submit a criminal case to the DA's office against one of our officers, and they decline criminal charges because there's not enough evidence to support a criminal charge, then it comes back to us administratively. And if we don't find any administrative violations on what this officer did, then, you know, it doesn't look great, but if we can't file criminal charges against him and there is no administrative violations against him, they will not be disciplined.
Why would you submit anything to the DA if there's not evidence to show that it happened? That doesn't make sense to me. And why would the DA then turn it back for technical reasons when you saw evidence of a violation occurred?
Well,
that doesn't make sense to me. Again, I'm learning. Maybe there's something I'm not aware of, but
I could just tell you this, Reverend Carter. If a person goes up there and says these things about an officer, and then the officer comes in and says, I did not do that. This is what I did. These are my reports. It doesn't reflect that, and I did not do it. Well, it's her word or his word against that officer's word. There's really no other evidence supporting the allegations. So the DA's office will more than likely decline charges.
All right. There's a question on number 7. I'm seeing here. Number 7. Over a year of deliberation in 2018, the mayor's task force on diversity submitted a list of.
We missed some.
Can you all hear?
Well, let's go back.
We missed
under 4A.
Okay.
Is brother? We clarified that Brother Criswell is going to get me the information that he can on that one.
Right.
Yes, that would be a core.
And B under that would be the question about the qualifications of a reasonable trained officer. What defines?
What defines a reasonably trained officer?
Yes.
Chief? I don't have a specific definition for you, Reverend Banks. I can tell you this. In my opinion, a reasonably trained police officer would be an officer who has successfully passed the training academy and the field training program. So the training program is about 730 hours of training that they receive before they even get out on the streets. And then once they get to the streets, they have to pass a field training program for another 6 months. So if you pass both of these segments of training, in my opinion, you are a trained police officer, even though not well experienced. And that comes with time, obviously.
Major, would you give us a little input from the Sheriff's Department on that same question?
Absolutely. And I would piggyback on what the chief said. You know, you send somebody through the state academy. The state of Kansas ultimately says this person is successfully completed or not in whatever case. But, you know, generally speaking, they've successfully completed the basic training. They are now a certified law enforcement officer in the state of Kansas. We, as does the police department, we then put them through a training program afterwards, which is also a certified program. So at that point, you know, that person is trained as a law enforcement officer in this state.
Okay.
Okay. And
Mr. Johnson?
Yes, please.
This is Gordon. I just would add one other sort of related comment to outside investigations. We, and Chief York can correct me if I'm wrong, but we do currently have a protocol in the police department. When we have an officer involved shooting, we bring in an outside reviewer, if you will, to go over the particulars of that officer involved shooting. So In this instance, we are using outside independent other officers to look at what went down with officer-involved shootings. That's correct, right, Chief?
Yes, you are correct.
Okay, just wanted to throw that in there.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think we talked about this a little bit, but I'll go over it again. This is number 5 for everyone that has the list. What are the qualifications?
C under 4, chokeholds.
Oh, do we not address that?
No.
Chokeholds?
No.
We haven't
Okay,
on this meeting. Yeah.
please forgive me. Yes, Chief, what is the current position on chokeholds?
We do not have a chokehold. We have what we call a shoulder pin, which is completely different from a chokehold. However, I've recently changed policy, as most of you guys are aware, that a shoulder pin would only be used when an officer is fighting for his life. So it'd be a deadly force technique. So we have no chokeholds. We haven't had chokeholds for as long as I can remember. We've had what they call as a shoulder pin. However, you are still placing your arms around a portion of the suspect's neck. So since the George Floyd incident has come out, I have changed that policy where that can only be used in a deadly force encounter.
Okay. Answer this for me. In a situation where there's more than one officer, when you're talking about when a person's life is threatened, that's normally one-on-one contact, where that type of hold would be, it would not or should not be used where there's more than one officer available to help subdue the offendant. Is that correct?
Yeah, normally you would not have to use the shoulder pin when you have 2 officers.
Okay.
Unless that suspect is grabbing one of the officer's guns and trying to remove it from his holster. That would be a justified use of the shoulder pin.
Okay, thank you.
I will, let me jump in here real quick. There are persons that are not part of the panel that are attendees that have had their hands raised. I would encourage you all to send an email with your questions directly to the task force. And that email address is CPR Task Force, all one word, CPR Task Force at wycokck.org. CPR Task Force at wycokck.org. Thank you. Now we're at number 5, right? Is that number 5, Reverend Banks? Y'all tracking with me? All right. The qualifications of veteran officers who are used to train recruits. A possible problem they put here is that they are often tied to the old ways, and they can teach only what they know. Recruits are forced to fall in line or risk being excluded or ostracized. Chief, Major Sheriff, Major Sopty.
I would say to that question is that I'm going to go back to the contract, where if an officer has enough seniority and he does not have a disciplinary history and or sick time abuse or things like that, he would be awarded that job. So we have a qualified bid job and we have chief's pick jobs. I don't want to get too far in the weeds with this, but there are several jobs where I get to pick the officer, and the training academy is not one of them. So if that officer—
Would you repeat that? Would you clarify?
Yeah, so there are 2 types of bids we use: qualified bid procedure and chief's pick bid procedure. So people that work in the chief's office, people that work in internal affairs, things like that, I get to pick those people. I get to hand pick those people. They don't have to worry about seniority or anything like that. When it comes to jobs like narcotics or the training academy, it's called a qualified bid procedure. And if you have enough seniority and you don't have disciplinary issues, you'll get that job. So a 20-year patrolman wants to put in for the police academy as an instructor, and he doesn't have any, like I said, any disciplinary issues, he would get that position, and then we would train him from there.
You
So-
would train, wait,
Yeah,
he would get the position and then you would train him.
Yes, they have to be trained in, like, obviously for how to drive, how to show our recruits how to drive police vehicles in pursuit training, right? So we have to train them on that, and we have to train them on how to train the officers, how to use force, how to apply force.
Who would train those individuals?
They're outside entities. We send them to training, they learn how to do it, they come back here and they train the recruits. So like PPCT, that's our use of force, right? That's our use of force system. We send them to be trained, they come back and then they train the recruits. So they do get outside training. They do get outside training for the academy.
Yeah. What raised the question that we're addressing now is the systemic presence of continuing old, sometimes illegal, outworn traditions. And the case in point is the situation involving George Floyd. You had a senior officer who has his knee on George Floyd's neck with his left hand in his pocket. He has 3 junior employees standing aside. All of them know or should know that what he's doing is wrong. But the system insulated him and allowed him to continue doing it until George Floyd died. And they had to comply with the system, or the thin blue line would whip them into order. That's the process. That's what happens.
That's what happened there. That is correct. But we have,
and that's why I'm asking the question.
No, it's a good question. And we have training and policies in place that if an officer sees another officer doing something out of policy, he will stop that officer and report him. So it happened in Minneapolis, and I will tell you, our officers are trained from day one that if they see any type of misconduct, they are to report it.
Chief, would you go as far as to say that's part of the training, but is that also part of the policy, the written policy?
It's part of our code of ethics policy, and it's part of training that we do in the academy.
Okay.
I mean, they've been trained on that.
There's a statement that they've made that's followed by a question that I was starting on. The statement, I'm at number 6, gentlemen, that are from the clergy caucus. There is an immediate need for meaningful social interactions between minority communities as defined as Black, Brown, and Asians, and with the public safety departments. This is critical to establishment of mutual respect and trust moving forward. Reverend Harris, Reverend Banks, did you all have anything on that statement that beyond what it was on?
when we convened the diversity task force, and I think Monsignor was on that, we talked about, there have been bits and pieces of programs over the years. I know Pride Black Firefighters did it from the fireman's standpoint. And there were groups of Black policemen who did it informally. There might have been some DARE participation, but generally speaking, what we're talking about is developing a relationship with the young people starting as early as elementary school, so that they don't grow up seeing police as bad men, as boogeymen, so to speak, as someone to fear rather than someone to trust and to develop meaningful relationships, and to be truthful when they come to you and ask you if you've seen anything wrong being done. That's what we talked about. And there was a commitment made that they were going to do a better job of that. And that's one of the areas that when we ask the question, what of the diversity task force recommendations that were approved by the unified government, are they still being enforced? Is action being taken against them? Is it measurable? What has been done since 2018 on those task force recommendations?
So that
was one.
6 through 6 and 7 there, right, Reverend Banks there? That's inclusive of both of those?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Chief?
He's muted.
Please, got to unmute yourself, Chief.
Yeah, my bad.
There you go.
So we have a number of programs. If Reverend Banks is asking me what we have done when it comes to community engagement with the juveniles, with our young people, is that what you're asking me, Reverend?
Yeah.
Okay, so just recently, as of last year, we started the PAL program, which is a phenomenal,
What kind of program is that?
I'm sorry?
What kind of program was that? I missed that.
Called PAL.
Is that the program on 5th and, is
Yes.
that the Thomasik?
Yes, 5th and Ann's Police Athletic League. And we have about 800 kids in that neighborhood, or throughout the entire UG, KCA. About 800 kids signed up that come in there and interact with 2 community policing officers, and they work out, they box, they garden, they do computer type of work. There's a number of programs they have inside the PAL. So we also have in the schools, we have a number of things that we do yearly. Today a reader, tomorrow a leader program, where we go into the schools and read to the kids. We bring pizza. They call police over pizza to the kids at USD 500. We do the Explorer program, the OK program. You guys are familiar with the OK program, where we mentor kids from, what's that school? The old Coronado there. I'm not sure if it's still called Coronado, but we do that with those kids and kids at Schlegel. So those are just 5 or 6. I have a whole list I can send it out to the group that we do yearly with our kids, with the police department.
The list is fine. I would challenge you to make sure that there's still active programs moving forward to meet an increasing need. I'm aware of the OK program. Pastor Carter represents the Baptist Ministers Union, and we've had some fits and starts with that program. So I hope that the others are faring better than the OK program.
Well,
There's no point for raising it.
I will tell you,
Issue.
Reverend Banks, I've met with the OK program coordinator from Oakland, and actually Reverend Tony Carter and I both met with, I can't think of his first name right now, but he convinced me what a great program it is. And if manpower would allow, I'd like to have 2 OK officers. That's how important I think the OK program is. And I'm sure Tony Carter there is shaking his head to me that it's a good program, and I'd like to expand upon it.
Thank you.
And I might add, Chief, that the officer that we have in place right now, Officer Curry, is doing an excellent job, particularly considering that we're in the midst of a pandemic. But he has really, I didn't think anybody could outdo Jonathan Westbrook, but Officer McCurry is making a great stab at it. He's had several of the Chiefs players meet with the kids. I mean, and he has some viable programs going. So that's one that, yeah, we've had some sputtering going on, but right now they're having probably as substantive of meetings as they've had in a while. So I'm very pleased with where the program is. And North Cross out of Oakland, you mentioned his name, is pleased as well with the output that we're getting from the OK program. And I can't vouch for that one. I don't know about any of the others, but I do know about that one.
And I just might add that all of these programs, although they are sort of executed by our police department in the hopes of building good relationships with the police department, but also to help young people get exposure to the number of public services careers that are available in the unified government. Now, we hope a lot of those young people will decide that they want to become law enforcement officers, but we also know that we need accountants and we need lawyers and we need a lot of other folk other than law enforcement to run the government. And so these young people get exposed to a number of public services careers and what they have to do to be able to compete for those careers in the future. I will say, just closing, that Mid-America Regional Council did a study about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, and just in our region alone, when you count city, state, federal, and county employment, we're going to need 30,000 public services employees in the next 10 years because all of us baby boomers are retiring. So these programs help expose our young people to the really good career opportunities that are available if you want a career in public services.
So let me ask a question there. So are the other functional departments within the unified government, are they sending people out to these schools? You mentioned not just public service, but the other departments, functions, are they doing
Yes, sir.
this? They're doing this.
In fact, we do a regional career expo every 2 years in collaboration with Mark. We bring anywhere from 2,700 to 3,200 kids from across our region, Region 7, to Bartle Hall, and they spend a day going to different stations where we have public service employees explaining to young people the career choices that they have in public services. And last year we did it in November. We had 2,700 students from 37 schools, and it's been so successful that we now have to do a morning session for middle schoolers and an afternoon session for high schoolers, because the attention span of the middle schoolers is a little shorter than the attention span of the high schoolers. But it has been woefully successful in my view, because these young people get a chance to see what a career in public services looks like. And I'll just share you one real example of a young lady who came through our career fair, African-American female. She wanted to go to college to be a microbiologist, but she says, I don't know what microbiologists do. I just know I like science. So I said, hey, the director of my water pollution control laboratory is an African-American woman who is a microbiologist. I will arrange for you to spend time with this person who does what you want to do when you grow up. So that was the value of the Career Expo. This young lady had the opportunity to spend real time with someone who does what she wants to do and gets paid to do it. So we do that every 2 years because it takes an incredible amount of planning and coordination to get 30 some odd schools coordinated with the teachers and the counselors and the buses and the food. It's a 30-person planning group that we have to do it every 2 years just to rest up from planning. So yes, we do that, to answer your question, Reverend Banks.
Thank you.
I will. Can you hear me?
Sure, you're not coming through.
Here we go.
You're not coming
Okay.
through.
I keep pressing the button and nothing's happening. So, okay. I will tell everybody we're just about halfway through questions and we've got about 40 minutes roughly left there. So I just want to make sure everybody is aware of where we are. I don't want to miss anything. I don't want to rush anything, but I just want to make you aware.
Sure.
Got about 40 minutes. Question number 8. There must be a significant decrease in the number and frequency of racial profiling incidents. What is being done relative to racial profiling is the question.
Well, Commissioner, I would tell you this. We train our officers, again, back to the academy, and every year on bias-based policing and fair and impartial policing. So there's about a 10-hour block that our recruits receive on fair and impartial policing. I can give you some numbers on the amount of complaints that we've had when it comes to being racially profiled. So in 2015, we had 10 complaints. 2016, we had 3. 2017, we had 2. 2018, we had 3. 2019, we had 2. And so far this year through July, we have 1. So it's a good thing. We do not receive that many complaints involving this.
When you talk about the training, and I want to just kind of go back, what you talked about, is this all part of the academy? And then you referenced that there is outside training. Can you talk more about what the outside firm is that does the training? Can you kind of elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yep. So we've had, in the years past, we've had a company come in and all they do is teach fair and impartial policing. So they taught us that for a number of years. Well, now they're doing train the trainer. So I have a major being sent to this company, and he's going to be trained on fair and impartial policing and how to teach it. So again, that's just another step that we've used and have done, because now I have a major who can train it anytime we want to have him train it, not have to rely on a company to come in and rely on their schedule and have to pay them. So that's just one thing that we've done recently.
Okay. In a previous, this is number 9 for everyone that's tracking. In a previous airing of a task force meeting, a presentation was made regarding the introduction of body cams or car cams, which lead to these following questions. How are those recordings involving public safety officers being safeguarded and handled? This is especially critical in a process where a finding or a decision is challenged in court. Can you speak to that, Chief? That's the first question.
So yes, when the new body-worn camera system is fully operational, all that information will be stored on a server here at police headquarters. And only certain people will have access to that information.
Chief, can I ask you a question about those body cams?
Sure.
Does the officer have the ability to turn those cameras off and turn them back on?
Yes. Now, we're tweaking the policy still, but this is what the policy is going to say. When an officer is doing an enforcement action, an arrest, a car stop, in some type of investigation, something he's doing, investigating a burglary, whatever the case would be, it has to be on. You have to have it on. Now, if you come across a citizen that you just want to talk to, or that citizen wants to talk to you, you can ask the citizen, you can tell the citizen, I'm recording this. And if they would say, hey, do you mind just turning that off? We're just going to talk about whatever. The officer can turn it off. So there is discretion. When the officer's in a hospital, yeah, we're going to have him turn it off. We don't want to violate HIPAA. So, but the bottom line is he has to have it on when he's doing any type of police action. And if he turns it off or he doesn't turn it on, he'll be subject to discipline.
That's what I wanted to hear. That's what I wanted to hear.
The body cams will be ready to go pretty soon. Correct, Chief?
Yes, in the fall. They will be here. We've already signed all the contracts. We're waiting for them to ship our cameras, and then we have to install them into the cars because we have in-car cameras as well. And which, for everybody who doesn't know that, they sync with your body-worn cameras. So the minute you turn your lights and sirens on, your body-worn camera turns on. So we have to install the in-car cameras, and we should be fully operational in the fall.
Thank you.
There was, maybe either Chief or to Gordon, you can talk about the links that we had to go to in terms of infrastructure to that. And after that, Dr. Hill, I think you had your hands up.
Well, that's a good point, Commissioner. We did not have the in-the-ground infrastructure to deploy body cameras sooner than we are able to do it now. So in other words, we had to put connectivity across the city, starting with our police stations, substations, such that there would be connectivity when you turn these things on. We still have a pretty large technological divide in our community, and those are some of the challenges that we have to try and figure out before we can deploy some of these new technologies. Just a side note, we decided just this last week that we needed to run fiber to some of our non-operational recreation facilities because schools are out, because kids now are going to have to study remotely, and a lot of our kids, they may have the tablet, but they don't have the connectivity to go, at home. So we thought that would be a good way to help the school district, good way to help the community, because we just did not have the kind of connectivity from a technological standpoint to be able to quickly deploy our body-worn cameras. And, everything now is driven by technology, guys. So we had to get that stuff in the ground first and make sure it was working and operational. And so, yes, it's taken us a couple of years. I think we started working on body cameras really right after Ferguson. And, all the vendors saw us coming, right? So, and, y'all don't give me money off the tree to buy all this stuff.
Thanks, Gordon. Dr. Hill.
Yes, sir.
First of all, I'd just like to say I really appreciate the pastors being with us on this evening. And I want to go back. My first concern was not concern, just comment was that I just wanted to make sure that the pastors knew that the body cams were not actually up and running yet, but that they're on the way. And then secondly, earlier we talked about litigation from 5 to 10 years ago and how things had happened and how comfortable the captain was with the training now and the officers now. So my question to Captain York is the training substantially different now than it was 5 or 10 years ago? Because it was several years ago, a lot of the litigation that's still in litigation, stuff had happened. So I just want to know now, have we improved? Have we gotten rid of some of the officers that were negligent or defiant? Just some comments on that.
Yeah, so we've, we have terminated a lot of officers in the past. When Ron Miller was here, I think he terminated close to 20 officers for various things. So to answer your question, I believe the training has improved. We've had, years back, we had officers putting themselves in harm's way when it comes to a moving vehicle. Well, you put yourself in harm's way and the vehicle's coming at you, you fire upon that vehicle, that's not good. That's not a good practice. So a simple policy change would have been, you will not put yourself in harm's way. You will not get in front of a vehicle, and because automatically that driver is going to go right at you because whatever reason, they're panicking and they want to leave. So that little tweak of policy has reduced our officer-involved shootings. And that's just one. So yes, to answer your question, I really think we've gotten smarter over the years. We've tweaked our policies. We've improved our policies. We work closely with our legal department when it comes to drafting our policies and improving upon them. So yeah, I think there's a reason why, in the past we would have, 10 years ago, we'd have 12 or 13 officer-involved shootings per year. We have 1 or 2 now, because I think that comes through just through better training and and be able to slow things down, talk to people, recognize when people are suffering in a mental crisis, things like that. All these little training pieces that we've talked about for the last couple months has really reduced our uses of force and our deadly force situations. So I hope that I answered some of your questions with that.
Thank you, Chief. Second question is, what happens to an officer when the cameras are not activated or the view is obstructed by a hand or a raised car hood?
Well, the policy is pretty clear. When you're out of your car, your camera will be on. Now, if you get into a fight and you lose your camera, okay, well, we can't stop that from happening. But to intentionally cover your camera, and we find that to be the case, yeah, you would be subject to discipline. I mean, we're going to train these officers on the best way to approach vehicles and to approach people, the proper angles that you need to use to get the best footage possible. So I think the question is, if the officer is deliberately turning off his camera, that's unacceptable. And
if the view is obstructed somehow, whether that be deliberately or not, I suppose.
Well, if it's deliberately obstructed by putting his hand over the camera, then that officer would be subject to discipline. If it's not an intentional act and something got in his way because he didn't see it, we would view and you know, all the facts and determine if that officer had committed a policy violation.
Raised car hood.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I understand that, honestly.
Well, on Facebook, I saw a vignette of three police cars lined up. All of them had their hoods up, and the caption was, "When the hood's up, the cops are up to no good."
Mm.
So
I've never seen that, but I will tell you this, those officers on KCKPD would be held accountable for those type of actions.
okay.
Leads to the second or third question here. Who ensures the secure handling and holding of the recordings to maintain its evidentiary value?
Okay, so I asked my IT guys that, and let me find you the answer. So the video will not be on media cards or CDs like in the past. They will be stored on a secure server. It is a function of the software to keep track of every action taken on every video as to ensure that the video has not been tampered with. So it's in the software program. It's in the server that keeps it from being tampered with.
Okay. And I asked the question because when we negotiated the substance abuse policy, the handling, the protocols for that, there were signature chains all along, because when we go to arbitration, the record has to be clear as to who handled it, because if there's a chain broken there, all the case falls apart. It falls out. The credibility of the evidence disappears.
That is correct. And I'll just expound a little bit further on this. You know, so what we have a body worn camera coordinator. That person will be responsible for following chain of command and for court purposes. So we have, you know, civilian employees in place that will be tasked with keeping the chain of command where it needs to be. Chain of custody where it needs to be.
Thank you.
Chief, I have a question about the training when we talked about the training for the body cams. Are we again consulting outside firms to do the training relative to body cams, since this is a new program for Wyandotte County?
Okay, so yes, we have. We sent Detective Cameron Morgan to a company that has trained him on how to show the officers and train the officers on how the camera functions, what it can and cannot do, how to approach a vehicle that you're stopping to get the best possible footage, how to approach a civilian that you are talking to in the street or you're stopping in the street. So yes, it's a pretty simple process when it comes to how the camera functions, but and they'll also be talking about different lighting. What's the best lighting for these cameras? So before those officers strap that camera on, they will be trained on the operation of it and what it can and cannot do.
Right. Thank you. This next question is question 10, which is talking about testing. And so it's asked, what is the current test given to prospective public safety hires? Have the tests been certified as acceptable, unbiased predictors of on-the-job success? This was pointed out as a deficiency in 2018 and a change that was recommended. So relative to testing, can you speak to that?
Well, I wasn't part of that 2018 committee. And I don't know if the test, I don't want to speak on if the tests have been certified as acceptable, unbiased predictors. I can tell the group here how we go about hiring policemen, but I can't answer the question on if it's been certified as acceptable.
I would suggest that we follow up on that question.
Yeah.
Chief, if you would, and then bring that back to us and we would.
Right. And I
help.
was on that task force, and that was a big discovery that we were using tests that were not certified. And it seemed like some of the practitioners involved in psychological testing had certain biases that played itself out. So we need to verify that that was followed up.
Commissioner,
Go ahead, Major Soptic.
I can say, at least from the sheriff's office, ours is through Standard Associates. It is certified, validated, and court tested. So if that at least helps this group with the sheriff's office side.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I believe ours as well, but I want to give you some better specific information before, so you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So I'll share that in an email.
Yeah, Chief, and that was October 2016, not 18, and that it should be a YouTube video out there of that actual task force report, but it was 2016, not 2018.
Okay.
And Monsignor is right. The testing validation was a big question of concern back in 2016.
As I recall, the person who designed it and was implemented was a little bit hazy on what they were supposed to show and justifying the questions that he was raising. And I recall, I remember having to pull Monsignor off of him at one meeting at least. Thank you.
Monsignor, we didn't know this about you. Tell us.
Well, he has his moments.
I can be passionate if you haven't figured that out. It wasn't a physical encounter. We were going at it verbally fairly hard.
I thought it may be a Memorial Hall event.
Oh boy, that was good. That was good at breaking that conversation, Reverend Banks. Thank you for pulling. Now we're going to talk about a very serious subject on nepotism. What is the current policy on nepotism? In previous commission meetings and for many years, this practice has been criticized. It is an unfair advantage and suggests that there is a genetic predisposition that exists for an applicant to be considered. In other words, family names, legacies, and relationships are disadvantages that the applicant should not be forced to compete against. Chief, and you're unmute yourself.
So I can tell you this, I hired 25 recruits in January of this year. This is my mindset on this. The only thing that I have an issue with, and its policy, is that you can't supervise your loved one. You can't supervise your husband. You can't be in the chain of command of your husband or your wife, whatever the case may be. But if you have a brother that's on this police department and you'd like to be on this police department and you're qualified to be on this police department, I don't have a problem with hiring you. So I'm not worried about, for me, I'm not worried about names and legacy and relationships. I think most of the time when family is on the police department, they're usually good officers. It gets a little clunky when it comes to who they can supervise. Once they move up to the chain of command, it's a little clunky sometimes about, okay, well, you can't supervise your son, or you can't supervise your wife. So that makes it tough for us as managers. But when it comes to hiring family, I'm not against that.
Well,
it's gonna be against
if you would, do you know of instances where you think someone was hired and they had an unfair advantage simply because of their family relationships?
No, I know nothing of that.
Well, Mayor and Chief, the reality of it is that we had public meetings as a part of the discussions during the 2016 deliberations. The audience was filled with people who stood up and gave their qualifications for firemen, for policemen, whatever. And they fell by the wayside. But then when they look on the list of who was hired, they see the names of well-known families who are already in number on those particular forces. Now, it doesn't take much for people to jump to a conclusion, especially if the qualifications are well known, if the test scores are generally the same, if all things being equal, the person selected is a person who has a relationship or is a legacy, it doesn't pass the continuing smell test, because it happens more than once. It happens too often. It still happens. And the prime example was a few years ago when Mayor Holland stood on the stage and the fire chief was introduced a new class, no people of color, no women, but his son was on there, as was the son of the directing union business agent and a couple of other people. That doesn't go over well. It doesn't.
I would also add to this discussion to further muddy, or actually, I should say to muddy the waters, is that we have been asked or to consider as a commission whether we should hire persons from outside of Wyandotte County for public safety positions. And thus far, the commission is held pretty tight to not allow persons outside of Wyandotte County to be hired. And so when you look at the issue of nepotism and you talk about hiring within not only families, but you're also talking about keeping that done within the county, it does kind of muddy the waters and make it challenging as it relates to trying to find the best qualified persons to fill our positions. And that's something that we've had to consider.
And just to clarify, we can hire someone who lives from outside the county, but within a certain time frame, they have to move in to meet the residency requirement. In fact, a lot of our new police and fire are coming from outside the county, relocating, and that is its own problem because it's hard for people to relocate sometimes, but that is a requirement. The residency requirement is still in effect.
Okay. Question number 12 is the one regarding collective bargaining. Are we good on that, Reverend?
Yeah, we've already addressed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Hey, this is Gordon. I just got a call. I'm backup for my stepdad for his dialysis, so I got to jump off and go pick him up. So if you guys got some questions you need me to follow up on, Anna, can you get those to me, please? I apologize. I got to dash.
Yes, I can. I'll send them.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon.
Thank you, Gordon. I'm going to jump to 12C, Reverend Reverend Banks.
Yes.
Is that a good place to start? We've got about 11 minutes here. Regarding the FOP contract Article 12, why can't a lodge representative or a union steward be questioned about what he and the member have discussed? Couldn't this end up in court and the rep be asked to respond is the question?
I'm not clear. Is this regarding a disciplinary matter?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Well, it would be, I mean, so you're talking about an administrative matter, correct? Because a criminal matter, we could.
Well, I was just going by the language. And I don't have it with me, but it didn't stipulate what type of action it had to be.
Right. So, I mean, I looked into that, and so I found that, you know, in criminal investigations, the union rep can be interrogated. So in administrative investigations, there's a confidentiality expectation between a union member and his representative. So it's kind of covered under what they call a Public Employee Relations Act. So that's where that falls under. And that's why we don't do that.
Does that include the photograph you're saying?
Yeah, so when a photograph, you know, if a person is has been charged, yes, the photograph would be released, just like any other person who has been charged in the criminal courts. That's an open record.
Yeah,
but I'm sorry, did you have a question, Reverend Banks, on that?
No, I was just trying to understand what the differences were between the two situations that you were describing.
Well, if you're talking about the photograph, why we don't release the officer's photograph. Now, we obviously, again, if he's been charged, that's public information. But if he's involved in a shooting and it's, you know, it's clearly a justifiable shooting, we would not release that information.
Okay, but and what causes the question in my mind? I know I've seen instances where a person of interest picture has appeared in the media.
Right. If there is a person out there, I think I know what you're talking about. If there's a person out there that is inflicting harm on others, he's a person of interest, they need to get that information out quicker versus having them formally charged for public safety interests. So that's when they would release a photograph of that particular person of interest because of the circumstances behind what he is doing.
And that's different from an officer who's been accused.
Well, an officer has he has been given the authority to use deadly force. So if he has to use deadly force, that falls within his duty. So no, we would not release that information or his photograph to the public because that's his duty as a police officer, is to use deadly force. If that person is in danger of being killed or he's in danger of being killed.
Reverend?
Go ahead, Major.
The other thing that you might consider in those two instances, difference being, with the police officer, the law enforcement officer, we know where he or she is. When information is being put out, where they're attempting to locate somebody or a person of interest, they're trying to find somebody or locate that person, to talk to them about an issue that's come up or something that maybe they've been involved in, which is a little different than knowing, we know where the police officer is. They're not just putting out that person's picture to say, we think they did it just because, they're putting it out to try and find them and bring them in and talk to them. So that's also a little different. But
I've also seen it where somebody, that they're not wandering around. They may be in custody, or they may know where they are, but they're still identified as a person of interest.
Okay. Yeah, I'm thinking more along the lines of like when they're trying to locate somebody.
Okay. All right.
Mayor, did you want to weigh in on that anywhere? At any point? Unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. I just want to clarify. So when someone, a police officer is engaged and uses force or deadly force, the pictures are not released because until investigation and adjudication, perhaps, in the fulfillment of their duty, they're not releasing the picture. But as soon as it would go to trial or something, it would become available. I'm just unclear.
No, I think you're right. I mean, if the officer shoots and kills someone and they are criminally charged for it, yes, that information would be forwarded. It'd be Kansas Open Records Act, because it'd be a criminal charge.
Well, the question, just to clarify, the question generally is sought to deal with those situations that it seems like when you review the contract, public safety people are insulated from scrutiny, from identification, from the same things that a general citizen would be no problem about giving that same information out about a general citizen. That's what I'm seeking to. And there are other instances, but that's somewhat the tip of the iceberg of the general question that we're raising.
Those cover items C, D, and E, it looks like, Reverend Banks.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And you know, I haven't done a detailed analysis of each of the contracts, but I've done enough to know that that's a general concern, and the language there. That's why I asked the question about the language that deals with management rights to do certain things that are to the benefit of the public's knowledge and the public's feeling that things are being done decently and in order, and they're not being insulated from doing things that the community ought to know about.
Is that a question or is that a statement, Reverend?
That's a statement, and that's a core of the general furor about police reform. The feeling that they are insulated, protected, given immunity from too many situations. And therefore, they act sometimes in a manner that's not becoming to them or the office, and to the detriment of the oath that they take when they're sworn in.
Okay.
All right.
We've got two more questions. I mean, did you
Well,
want to
let me just say this. I looked at the makeup of the CARES Act Distribution Task Force. And to my observation, there's not a person of color there. And that shocked me, because the impact of the pandemic, any way you look at it, it falls heavily on people of color. And the distribution of those funds should impact both of the pandemics, the one that I talked about that's of racial discord and long standing, and the diseased one, because we're severely impacted by both. And so what I want to know is what if any of that money, and the dollar figure might not be right, but what if any of that money is to be directed toward addressing some of these problems that surely have to surface and become part of the task force's recommendations and implementation to address the problem, because we represent the voices of reason. There are other factions and voices in this committee who want to handle things a different way. And we've seen the different way acted out in other communities, which is what we're trying to avoid. And so very succinctly, that's our intent here. And I'll close with the Dr. Martin Luther King quote. We must all learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we will perish together as fools. When things happen like they've happened, it's a wake-up call, and it gives us an opportunity to sit down and say, how does that affect us? Are we on our way there? What can we do to avoid that? And so that's where we are. Challenges, but opportunities. And it's up to us to decide how we're going to respond.
Amen.
And let me say this finally, we are available and willing to cooperate and participate and partner on any meaningful effort to accomplish any of this, all of that.
Yeah. So Mayor Avery, what he just said, I know we don't have a lot of time, but one of the questions is, why is there not a minority on this?
Right. Yeah. Thank you. So that was just the task force was selected to be a very small group. We have someone from county administration, Crystal Sprague, who really did the administrative work for that. We had 3 of our commissioners who, Commissioner Bynum, Commissioner Markley, Commissioner Philbrook. Commissioner Philbrook asked to be on the task force, so I asked her to do that. I asked Commissioner Markley to chair that because she's also the chair of the Administration and Human Services Subcommittee, Standing Committee. We had a request from Bonner Springs and Edwardsville to have a representative on there, so we placed 2 individuals there, and it was a very quick moving. There was no desire to exclude. We put out the request for funding, the application. We put out the solicitation of applications across the community. We received many applications from across the community. And I think if you would look at the presentation that was done last night, we had a special session that showed where the money was assigned. You'll be able to see that, in fact, funds went through, first of all, the bulk of the funds, $100 of the $226 per person went to governments. And the CARES Act is specifically for taking care of COVID-related expenses, and that has to be documented. It has to be accounted for. There's going to be an audit of those expenditures. Anything we get reimbursed for is going to be audited, and we have to justify everything we did. And that was distributed between Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas, the city side of it, Bonner Springs and Edwardsville, according to a formula of just equitable distribution among those 4 municipalities. There was also money that was allocated to education. And so each of those entities, taxing entities within the county, were able to apply for those funds. You can see how those monies were distributed. I think Donnelly College applied, Kansas City, Kansas Community College. We also then had money set aside for 501c3s. And again, we had a wide number of applications for that. But I think as you go through that, you'll see that we really had to follow very strict guidelines that came to us from the state of Kansas. And that's ultimately determined by the Treasury Department that allocated the CARES funding to the states in the first place. So we scored each of those based upon whether they met the criteria required of the CARES Act funding. It doesn't allow us, for instance, at the unified government to backfill our lost revenues, right? So all the sales tax revenues that we've lost because of the pandemic, we can't fill those coffers. We're just out that money. What we're able to do, though, any COVID-related expenses, additional overtime or staffing, other programs, personal protective equipment at the health department, has to follow strict guidelines. And I think you'll also see that a significant amount of money specifically went to the health department, and the health department is very aware, in fact, continually brings to our attention the very serious burden that the COVID pandemic has placed on the African-American community and on our Hispanic community. And so they're directing their funds to try and really develop capacity to stomp out the virus and care for those folks. So I think what you'll find if you look through it is a very equitable distribution according to the guidelines that came to us from the state of Kansas and ultimately from the Treasury Department. And of course, we would love to have more money. There is going to be a second round of funding that will not be given to the counties. It will still reside within the state. And how the state is going to allocate that, I'm not sure, but it's supposed to be for, I know at least for businesses and for economic development. And we're actively seeking to try and find ways to access some of those funds. And we have, in fact, lobbied at the national level. I personally lobbied our Congresswoman Davids and Senators Moran and Roberts to see if there could be any changes made in that first CARES Act that distributed these funds that would allow us perhaps to use that to backstop our revenues. And we've gotten no movement from the federal government on that. But I think, again, there was obviously no intent to exclude. It was just trying to get key people in this and move very quickly. And I simply, we had to keep a small group because we had very little time to put this together, and they put in 60, 70 hours, and we had to accommodate lots of schedules. But I would prefer we had found someone of color to be on there, to be honest, yes.
Mayor Ivy, I want to ask this.
Yeah.
Those people that you have on that committee, regardless of whatever decision they make, is it not true that the commissioners have to approve that?
And we did last night.
Okay.
It may be too late if you're saying all that's been done, but in the future, that's a red flag that the people in my community look for, to see what specific input people who look like us, people of color, have in the process. Otherwise, you're begging for problems and for questions that could be avoided.
Yes, I understand that. And again, I will say that it was asked to me who represents us, and I said, well, it is your commissioner. So in this case, at least for the northern districts, that would have been Commissioner Bynum, Commissioner Philbrook, and Commissioner Markley. I've already asked Commissioner Johnson to do quite a bit, so I spared him this time. But I absolutely understand that, and I appreciate those comments. Commissioner Johnson.
I think that brings everything to a conclusion. I appreciate the questions from our coalition of clergy, and you've given us some great things that we have to think about and address. You started that process, and we're going to have to continue that process. But thank you for the questions that have been asked, and we do solicit your ongoing prayers for us as we move forward with this task force endeavor to bring community and our police department closer together so we can have what is being called that beloved community here, even more so in Wyandotte County. So thank you all very much. And with that, go ahead, Reverend.
Just a minute before we close, we'll be sorely disappointed if none of these items that we have listed as concerns or suggestions appear in the final recommendations and things to be implemented by the task force and the unified government.
You'll be disappointed if they're not put in there.
If they're not
right
included in some of the things that go forward in some of the initiatives, the programs, the activities that if they don't address these concerns that we consider very serious, we will have missed an opportunity, and we will welcome other voices that nobody really wants to hear.
Yeah, I think that's well received, and I think that is definitely part of our objective. So again, a great appreciation for the questions, and continue to bring us aware, make us aware as we go along this process. Walk with us. We genuinely need as much support and as much covering in prayer as possible. So thank you to Reverend Harris and to Reverend Jenny Banks and all of the persons that are represented from the Clergy Coalition, and to all of the task force members who are here tonight to be represented as well. So with that, we're going to conclude tonight and just say farewell to everyone, and we meet again. God be with us.
God bless.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.